They say every family has its secrets. Some are small, almost innocent, an argument swept under the rug, a story no one talks about at the dinner table. But ours isn't small. It isn't innocent. It's alive. The house has always carried whispers, the kind that settle in the corners of rooms and ride on the draft of closing doors. At night, you hear movement slow, deliberate, measured footsteps that don't match anyone's pace. You tell yourself it's just the house shifting, old wood groaning with age. But houses don't breathe, and I've heard breathing when no one was supposed to be awake. What lives in our house doesn't belong in any family tree. It doesn't belong in this world, but we treat it like family because we have no choice. You'll learn to adjust when something impossible shares your walls. You set a place for it at the table, even though it never eats. You leave doors open so it won't rattle them in the night. You talk about it the way you'd talk about an eccentric uncle. Strange, unsettling. But part of your bloodline now, whether you like it or not, I never wanted to speak about it. We were taught not to. We were warned that speaking its name might invite it closer. But silence has eaten me alive, and tonight, I need someone to hear me. Maybe if I tell you, if I whisper the truth into the dark, I won't feel as alone. Just promise me you won't come looking for it. I haven't told anyone this before. Not really. The story has been gnawing at me for years, but every time I tried to form the words, they felt too heavy, too dangerous. It's like the air thickens when I even think about sharing it. But tonight, I can't keep it inside any longer. Maybe I haven't been sleeping enough. Maybe I've been listening to the house too closely. But I feel like if I don't speak it aloud, it will consume me completely. You seem like someone who's seen strange things too. I can tell by the way you listen, patient and quiet. Like you already know what it's like to carry something you can't explain. I need you to understand that I'm not asking you to believe me. I just need you to listen. That's all. Most people laugh when they hear about haunted houses. They think about creaky floorboards, shadows in the corners, or stories about abandoned cabins in the woods where kids dare each other to spend the night. They imagine a good scare, a rush of adrenaline, maybe even a campfire tale to retell with a smirk. But what I'm about to tell you isn't fun. It isn't the kind of story you'll laugh about in the morning. This is the kind of story that sticks to your ribs, that crawls into your thoughts when the lights are out, and makes you wonder if you're really as alone as you think. Our house looks normal from the outside. That's the worst part. It's not some run-down shack with boarded windows or a crooked chimney. It's not tucked away at the end of a dirt road where no one dares to go. It's just a house. A two-story, pale gray suburban home with a slanted roof and a porch swing that creaks in the wind. If you drove past it, you wouldn't think twice. You'd never guess that something inside doesn't belong to this world. And yet, the people in town, they know. They don't say it outright, but I've caught the looks. When I was a kid, no one wanted to come over for sleepovers. Parents made excuses. Kids suddenly remembered they had other plans. At first, I thought it was me. Maybe I was weird. Maybe my family was off in some way. But then I started noticing how the neighbors avoided walking too close to our house. How the mailman dropped the letters at the edge of the porch without stepping fully onto it. And how sometimes, when the wind was just right, the people across the street would shut their windows. Like they didn't want to hear what might drift out from ours. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. You'll think I'm crazy, but our family doesn't just live in that house. We share it with something else. Something that looks at us the way you or I might look at a painting, not with understanding. Not with recognition, but with curiosity. It doesn't try to hurt us. Not exactly. It doesn't try to help us either. It just is. And in return, we learn to live around it. That's the part that keeps me awake at night. How quickly the unnatural became routine. How silence became the safest language. You learn to live with creepy noises, slow scratching from the attic, footsteps pacing above your bedroom, even when everyone is asleep downstairs. You learn to accept the unexplained presence, like an invisible guest who drags chairs across the floor in the middle of the night, or breathes too close to your ear when you're half dreaming. You stop questioning it, because questioning it makes it worse. I don't think you realize how fast sleepless nights can start to ruin you. At first, I told myself it was all in my head. That's what everyone does, right? You hear knocking, and you convince yourself it's the pipes. You hear whispers, and you chalk it up to the wind. But how do you explain when the whispers say your name? How do you explain when the knocks match the exact rhythm of your heartbeat? That's when I started breaking. That's when I realized the house was listening to me as much as I was listening to it. I need you to promise me something before I go any further. Promise me you won't try to find the house. Promise me you won't get curious and think you're strong enough, brave enough, stupid enough to see it for yourself. Because you'll think it's just another story, just another creepy house in the woods, and you'll want proof. But there are things in this world that don't care if you believe in them. They exist whether you look or not. And once you see them, they see you too. I can still remember the first night I truly understood what we were living with. I had been lying awake, no signal on my phone, just staring at the ceiling. The air in the room was too heavy, pressing down on me like the whole house was exhaling over and over again. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw something shift. Not a shadow, not a trick of the moonlight. Something moved. Something tall. Something that didn't duck when it crossed under the doorway, because it didn't have to. It just stood there, not speaking, not breathing, just watching. And I swear, I could hear my own pulse pounding so loud, I thought it would wake my parents. But it didn't move toward me. It didn't move away either. It just waited. Do you know what it feels like to be watched by something you know isn't human? It's like your body knows before your brain does. Your skin prickles, your teeth ache, your eyes water like they're rejecting what they're seeing. That's the presence we live with. That's the thing we treat like family. I need you to understand why I'm telling you this. Not to scare you, not even to make you pity me. I'm telling you because silence has weight and mine has become unbearable. Every family has secrets, but ours was never meant to be passed down. And yet, here I am, whispering it into the dark, hoping that maybe if someone else knows, I won't drown in it alone. So listen carefully, because from here on, the story isn't just about what I saw. It's about what it wanted damned, why pretending it was family might have been the biggest mistake we ever made. When people ask about our house, I usually tell them it's just old. That's the simplest explanation, the one people accept without pressing further. Old houses make noises. Old houses shift with the wind, groan in the night, and collect shadows in their corners. That's what I tell them. But the truth is, age has nothing to do with it. The house sits at the very edge of town, close enough to be part of the neighborhood, but far enough that it feels separate. When you stand in the backyard, you can see the line of the woods pressing against the fence. The tree line's so thick it swallows the last of the evening light. Our house was built before most of the others on the street. My father used to say it was one of the original structures, back when the town was still finding its footing. But even he never liked talking about its history. It's 2 stories tall, narrow, and a little too angular, like whoever designed it wanted to make it unsettling without admitting it. The windows are long and thin, and at night they reflect light in strange ways, sometimes bending shapes that aren't really there. The front porch has a swing, but no matter how many times we fix the chain, it always creaks, like someone invisible is keeping it in motion. Inside, the rooms are oddly proportioned. The ceilings are too high in some places, too low in others, and the hallways seem to stretch longer than they should. If you stand at one end and stare, you almost expect the corridor to go on forever. The air inside is always a little cooler than outside, even in the height of summer. My mother once joked that it was energy efficient, but I never saw her laugh when she said it. There's a heaviness to the architecture, as if the walls themselves are watching. The wallpaper peels in places, curling at the edges, like dry skin, and no matter how many times my parents tried to replace it, the new sheets always came undone within weeks. The basement door doesn't quite close all the way, and sometimes you can feel air seeping up from below, cold and damp, carrying with it a faint smell like wet stone. Growing up there, I didn't question any of it. A child accepts their environment as normal, but as I got older, I started noticing how other houses didn't feel the same, how their floors didn't tremble when you walked across them, how their staircases didn't creak in a rhythm, like a heartbeat pulsing beneath the wood. The people in town knew. They always knew. I remember overhearing whispers when I was younger. Some neighbors said the land the house stood on used to belong to miners. Others swore it was part of an old burial ground. There was even a rumor that the original owner disappeared inside it, his body never found, and that his family abandoned it after seeing things in the mirrors. Of course, rumors have a way of changing with each telling, but the one thing that stayed the same was the warning: don't go near that house at night. We lived there anyway. My family always brushed off the stories, but I noticed the way they avoided certain conversations. I noticed the way my father locked the attic door every night, even though no one ever went up there. I noticed how my mother always kept salt tucked behind the kitchen cabinets, though she never cooked with it. And then there were the little details, the things too small to ignore once you'd seen them. The clocks, for example. We had 3 of them, all in different rooms. No matter how many times we reset them, they'd stop at the same hour, 3:07. Sometimes they'd all freeze in unison. Other times one would stall, and the others would follow minutes later. My parents pretended not to notice, but I watched my father throw away more than one clock in frustration. Each time, the replacement would do the same. The animals knew too. Birds never lingered on the roof. Squirrels and raccoons avoided the yard. Even the stray cats that prowled the neighborhood gave our property a wide berth, skirting the fence like they could sense something waiting just beyond it. I remember one night hearing an owl calling from the woods, its hoots echoing through the trees, when suddenly it went silent, cut off mid-call, like something had swallowed the sound. The silence afterward was so deep it hurt my ears. Mirrors were another problem. I learned early on not to trust them. Sometimes when I looked, my reflection lagged, moving just a fraction of a second behind me. Other times I'd catch shapes in the glass, something standing behind me, something too tall, too thin. But when I turned around, the room would be empty. My mother draped sheets over most of the mirrors in the house after a while. She told me it was because she hated her reflection, but I knew better. It wasn't just me noticing these things. Everyone in my family felt it, even if they wouldn't admit it. Dinner conversations were filled with long pauses, with the sound of listening more than talking. At night, we moved carefully through the halls, not because we were afraid of waking each other, but because we were afraid of waking it. And it was there, always. Sometimes it would knock on the walls, softly at first, then louder, until the picture frames rattled. Sometimes the doors would open on their own, just a few inches, like an invitation. At other times, I'd wake up to the sound of furniture scraping across the floor in the room below mine. Heavy wooden chairs dragging, only to find everything exactly where it should be in the morning. We told ourselves it was the house settling. We told ourselves it was nothing, but deep down, we knew we were living with something that wasn't part of us. Something that wasn't human. And the strangest part, we never left. We never even thought about leaving. The house was ours, and whatever was inside it had made itself part of us. We didn't fight it. We didn't run from it. We treated it like family, because somewhere along the way, we realized it was easier that way. Looking back now, I don't know if that was survival or surrender. Maybe both. But I do know one thing. You don't live in a house like ours without changing. You don't share your walls, your air, your nights with something like that and stay the same. That's the setup, the foundation of everything that followed. And once you understand how deep its presence ran through our lives, you'll understand why the events that came next were not only inevitable, but inescapable. It didn't all happen at once. That's the trick of it. The way it lulls you into thinking you can live with it. That the house is just strange, just old. But then it begins to press harder, and soon you realize that what you thought were little disturbances were only the beginning. The knocking was the first to grow louder. At first it was faint, like someone politely rapping their knuckles against the wall in the dead of night. A soft tap, tap, tap that I tried to ignore, but it escalated. The knocks turned into heavy thuds, vibrating through the plaster, sometimes shaking dust loose from the ceiling. They came from everywhere inside the walls, above the ceiling, below the floor, sometimes in patterns, like it was trying to speak in a language we couldn't understand. My father would get up, stomp through the halls with a flashlight, and shout that it was just pipes, but even his voice trembled. Then came the doors. We kept them locked, but it didn't matter. I'd shut my bedroom door tight, hear the latch click into place, and still wake to find it wide open. Sometimes I'd feel the shift of air against my face, like the rush you get when someone walks past. Moments before the hinges groaned and the door swung inward. My mother started sleeping with her door blocked by a chair, but in the mornings the chair would be dragged to the side, neatly placed against the wall, as though someone had been careful not to wake her. The whispers were harder to explain away. They began in my dreams, soft voices threading into my sleep, telling me things I couldn't remember when I woke. But slowly, the barrier between dream and waking thinned. I'd open my eyes at night, the room dark, and still hear them, murmurs right against my ear, words I almost recognized but couldn't quite grasp. Sometimes they used my name. Sometimes they spoke of things I hadn't told anyone, things I'd only thought. That was when I stopped believing I was dreaming. One night, I woke to the sound of someone crying in the hallway. Not loud, but broken, quiet sobs. I froze, clutching my blanket, listening. The crying grew closer until it was right outside my door. My heart hammered as I stared at the shadow beneath the crack, waiting for it to move. But it didn't move. It just stayed there, motionless, while the crying went on and on. When I finally worked up the courage to whisper, "Mom," the crying stopped instantly. The shadow vanished. The silence afterward was worse than the sound had been. Furniture started shifting soon after. At first it was little things, a chair angled differently, a drawer left open, but then heavier pieces began moving. One morning we came downstairs to find the entire dining table pushed against the wall. Chairs stacked neatly on top of it, like someone had been clearing the space. Another night, I woke to the unmistakable scrape of wood against wood, only to discover my dresser had been moved several feet closer to the bed. My father swore we were playing pranks on each other, but I saw the way his hands shook when he said it. The nights grew longer, stretched by the constant disturbances. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, something new would happen. A knock, a whisper, a shadow shifting in the corner. The silence itself began to feel alive, pressing against my ears, waiting to break. And when it did break, it was always worse than the time before. There was one night I'll never forget. I woke to find myself standing, not in bed, not under my blankets, but standing in the middle of the room, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My hands were pressed flat against the wall, as though I'd been listening to something inside it. My nails had dug into the plaster, leaving little crescent-shaped marks. When I pulled away, I swore I heard something inside the wall pull away too, like it had been pressed against me from the other side. My siblings weren't spared either. My younger sister began talking in her sleep, full conversations with no one. When we tried waking her, she'd turn her head and whisper, "You'll scare it away." But when we asked who it was, she'd only cry and refuse to answer. My brother complained that someone kept sitting on the edge of his bed at night. He'd wake to feel the mattress dip under invisible weight, as though someone had perched there, watching him in the dark. And yet, we never left. We never ran. Maybe that sounds insane to you, listening now, but you have to understand, it wasn't just the fear that kept us there. It was the pull. The house had a way of weaving itself into you, convincing you that leaving was impossible. Every time we talked about moving, something would happen to make us stop. A sudden illness, a job falling through, a car that wouldn't start. It was as if the house itself had tightened its grip around us. The presence wanted us there, needed us there, and in a twisted way, we began to need it too. Because the longer you live with something like that, the harder it becomes to separate yourself from it. It stops being the house and starts being family. But the escalation didn't stop. It never stopped. Each night, the disturbances became more intricate, more deliberate, as though it were learning, you studying our weaknesses, our fears, our thoughts. I started to dread the sound of silence, because I knew it wouldn't last. The quiet was just its way of gathering strength before the next wave, and every time I told myself I'd gotten used to it, that nothing could surprise me anymore, it proved me wrong, because the house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it wanted us to remember that. It was the house itself that gave us the truth, though I'm not sure if it did so to warn us, or to welcome us in. It happened during one of those nights when sleep felt impossible. The air was too heavy, thick with silence that pressed against the chest like weight. I'd been lying awake, listening for the next disturbance, when I noticed a faint creaking beneath my bed. At first I thought it was the usual, the wood adjusting, the old frame shifting, but this was different. The sound wasn't random, it was deliberate. Creak, pause, creak, almost like footsteps. I leaned over the edge of the bed, half expecting to see nothing but dust and shadows. But there was something else, a small gap in the floorboards, one that hadn't been there before, and from that gap came a draft, carrying with it a smell I still can't forget. Old wood, damp earth, and something like iron. The next morning, while the rest of the family tried to go about their day, as though the night hadn't been filled with whispers and shifting furniture, I pried at the loose board. It gave way to icily, as if it wanted to be opened. Beneath it was a hollow space, and inside that space lay an old, leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked and brittle, the pages yellowed with age. I remember the way my fingers shook as I flipped it open, revealing cramped handwriting in faded ink. It wasn't a diary of daily life. Not really. It was more like a record or a confession. The entry spoke of the house long before we ever lived there, back when it had been built by a man named Elias Gray. He'd been a taxidermist, though the word didn't quite capture what he'd done, according to his own words. His work wasn't about preserving life, it was about preserving something else entirely. He wrote about voices in the walls, about learning from them, about how they taught him methods no human had known before. His journal described how he could keep more than bodies intact. He could keep the essence, the soul, to unmake the boundary, he wrote, to stretch the moment of death into eternity. The entries grew stranger with each page, shifting from technical descriptions of his work to near religious devotion. He claimed the presence in the house had guided his hands, that he was only ever its apprentice. He hinted that his greatest creation had never left the house at all, and in the final pages, his words grew desperate. He scrawled that he'd made a mistake, that he had preserved something that was never meant to be touched, and that he could no longer control it. His last sentence was barely legible, ink smeared with what might have been blood. If anyone finds this, do not stay past the 7th night. When I showed the journal to my mother, she slammed it shut. Her face had gone pale, and she whispered that some things weren't meant to be read aloud. My father, ever stubborn, said it was just the ramblings of a madman, but even he refused to touch the book again. After that, we all began to notice things we hadn't seen before. Carvings etched into the wood of the basement walls, symbols none of us recognized. Circles within circles, shapes that seemed to shift if you stared too long. They were faint, like someone had tried to sand them away but hadn't finished. In the farthest corner, scratched deep into the stone foundation, was a single word: hunger. The whispers grew bolder after we found the journal. It was as though the house knew we understood now that the secret was no longer secret. I'd be walking through the hall and hear a low voice murmur from the walls, "Stay." My sister swore she heard it tell her, "You belong." And one night, while I sat in bed clutching the journal to my chest, I heard it clear as day, right beside my ear, though no one was there. You found my words. It wasn't just sound anymore. We began to see it. At first, fleeting shapes in the corners of our eyes, shadows that dissolved when we turned, but then clearer, reflections in the mirror that didn't match us, an extra figure lingering behind, its face obscured, its body too long, its arms bent at angles that didn't make sense. My brother screamed one night when he caught his reflection, smiling at him, even though he wasn't. The presence was no longer content with whispers and knocks. It wanted acknowledgement. It wanted recognition. And in the strangest, most terrifying way, it wanted acceptance. The journal explained why. Elias Gray hadn't simply been haunted. He had bound himself to the house, bound something inside it with his rituals, his experiments, his obsession with keeping death at bay. He hadn't created a family, he had created a prison, and we were the new inmates. My mother tried burning the journal, but the pages wouldn't catch. They blackened at the edges, smoke curling up, but the flame refused to spread. We buried it instead, deep in the backyard, but the next morning it was back beneath my bed, as though it had crawled there in the night. And then the encounter happened. The moment none of us could deny anymore. It was late. The house in one of its unbearable silences, when my sister began to scream. We rushed to her room, only to find her pressed against the far wall, pointing at the bed. The blankets were pulled, taut, stretched upward by invisible hands, as though something were lying beneath them, breathing. The shape-shifted rose, and then the blankets fell flat. A second later, a voice spoke from under the bed. "I'm not finished yet." We pulled her out of the room and slammed the door, but the whisper followed us down the hall, crawling along the walls, chasing us until we huddled in the living room together, shaking and silent. That was when we finally admitted it to each other and to ourselves. This wasn't just a house with strange noises, or a series of bad dreams. We were living with something that wasn't human, something Elias Gray had brought into this world and trapped here. And worse, still, it didn't want us gone. It wanted us close. And maybe, deep down, some part of us had already agreed. After the night of my sister's screams, none of us could pretend anymore. The journal, the carvings, the whispers, they weren't tricks of the mind. They were the truth, and the truth was too large to escape. Still, my father insisted we try. He packed bags before dawn, ordered us into the car, and told us we would never set foot in the house again. His voice shook, but his hands were steady. He thought movement would be enough, that leaving would solve everything. But the house had other plans. We drove for hours that morning, the woods blurring past the windows. The road seemed endless, an unbroken ribbon through trees too tall, too still. My father's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We'll find town soon," he muttered. "We'll get signal, call someone, anyone." Yet the trees only grew thicker, the road narrower, and the sense of being swallowed deeper. I don't know how long we drove before we noticed the truth. My brother was the first to point it out, his voice barely above a whisper. "Haven't we passed that same tree before?" At first my father barked at him, but then we all saw it. A gnarled oak, its trunk split in half like a wound. A tree we had passed, not once, but 3 times already. The road wasn't taking us away. It was looping us back. The air in the car grew suffocating. My mother clutched the journal. It had appeared again in her bag, though none of us had packed it. She begged my father to turn around, to face the house instead of the road. "It won't let us leave," she whispered. We're its family now. My father refused, driving faster, until the engine sputtered and died without warning. We sat there in silence, the forest pressing in on every side, until the whisper came again. This time, not from the house, but from the trees themselves. Stay. We abandoned the car. My father led us into the woods on foot, swearing that if we kept walking long enough, we'd find another road, another house, something. But the deeper we went, the more the woods betrayed us. Paths split and twisted, landmarks repeated. Birds didn't sing. Even our footsteps sounded muffled, as though the ground was swallowing them whole. That's when I realized the truth. The house wasn't a place you left. It was a place you carried with you. Its reach wasn't bound to its walls or its land. We were marked. We belonged by nightfall. Exhausted and broken, we stumbled back into the clearing and there it was, the house, waiting. Its windows glowed faintly, though no lights were on. Its door was cracked open, as though it had been expecting us. My father dropped to his knees, sobbing. My mother pressed her hand against the journal, silent. My siblings wouldn't even look at the house, their eyes fixed on the dirt. In me I felt something strange. Not fear, not anger, just resignation, as though I'd known all along that this was how it would end. We walked back inside, one by one. The air was colder, heavier, as if the house was breathing us in. Every step deeper felt like giving up, and yet also like giving in. The journal slid from my mother's hand onto the table, its pages fluttering open on their own. Words crawled across the paper, ink forming before our eyes. Welcome home. From that night on, things changed. The whispers didn't frighten us anymore. They comforted us, like lullabies. The shadows no longer hid in corners. They sat beside us, moved with us, became part of us. At dinner, we set an extra plate, though none of us ever touched it. The food would disappear on its own, and when we slept, we dreamed the same dream, walking hand in hand with something tall and faceless, its arms stretching wider than the sky. My father stopped talking about leaving. My mother stopped crying. My siblings started laughing again, though their laughter didn't always sound like theirs. And me, I started writing. The journal wasn't just Elias Gray's anymore. It was ours. I added my words beside his, my handwriting blending with his, as though it had always been there. Do you understand, listener? The house isn't a prison. It's a family. It took Elias. It took us. And it will take more. Sometimes I wonder if we fought hard enough, if there had been another way. But deep down, I know the truth. We never stood a chance. The house chose us. And once it chooses, you can't escape. Now, when I hear the whispers at night, I don't cover my ears. I listen. Because they don't sound like strangers anymore. They sound like us. And maybe they are. I haven't been able to sleep since that night. Not the way people are supposed to. I close my eyes, and I do drift off, but it isn't rest. It's a half-sleep, heavy with whispers and movements in the dark. I hear them every time, the creak of the floorboards, the scrape of claws against wood, the sigh of the house breathing around me. Sometimes, when I wake, I'm not in my bed anymore. I'll be sitting at the table, the journal open in front of me, my pen hovering over the page as though I've been writing in my sleep. But when I look down, the words aren't mine. I still hear it every night. That voice not just inside the house anymore, but inside me. It tells me things I shouldn't know. Things about you, about where you live, about the things you fear most when you're lying awake in the dark, trying not to move, trying not to breathe too loudly. I don't want to know these things, but the house insists on sharing, and when it whispers, I can't block it out. It's in me now. You need to understand I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. If you ever stumble across a place like ours, if you feel the woods growing too quiet, if you see a house that doesn't seem quite right, don't go inside, don't even get close. If you ever find that place, burn it. Don't stay. Whatever you think it is, whatever comfort it seems to offer, it isn't a home. It's a mouth, and it's hungry. Sometimes I wonder if there was ever a version of us that got out. Maybe in some other reality. My father kept driving, the road opened, and we found safety. But not here, not now. We live inside its story, and the story doesn't end with escape. It ends with belonging, and we belong to it now. I think that's why I'm speaking to you, because part of me, whatever part is still mine, wants to warn you before the rest of me goes silent, because I can feel it happening, piece by piece. My voice is changing, my thoughts are slipping. Some nights, when I look into the mirror, I don't see myself at Allie, see the long, faceless figure from my dreams, smiling without a mouth. Maybe you think you'd be strong enough to resist it. Maybe you'd run faster, fight harder, but I need you to listen. No one wins. Not against this. The house doesn't chase. It waits. It waits for the moment you open the door, for the moment you think you're safe, for the moment you belong, and then it never lets you go. So if you take nothing else from this, take this. The house is patient, and it remembers. If you hear it calling, don't answer. If you see it waiting, don't stop. Don't make the mistake we did, because once you step inside, you're already family, and my family never leaves. Tell me something. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and felt like someone was standing just outside your door? You don't see them, but you know they're there. That pressure in the air, that weight in your chest, it's the same feeling I live with every night now. I wonder if you've felt it too. Maybe it's been with you for longer than you realize. Maybe your house isn't as empty as you think. I read everything people send me, every story, every confession. Sometimes it helps, knowing I'm not the only one who's seen things they can't explain. Sometimes it makes it worse, because the more I read, the more I realize how many houses are like mine, how many families already treat something not quite human as one of their own. So if you've heard footsteps when no one was there, or if the walls in your home breathe a little too softly at night, tell me. Write it down below. Share it. I want to know. I'm not alone in this. Or maybe I want proof that you aren't either. But whatever you do, promise me something. Don't listen to the next story alone. Not unless you're ready for what might answer back. Because once you start listening, you've already opened the door.